Bells are ringing, so I will go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is a special meeting of the City of Kerrville, Texas Economic Improvement Corporation. The item number 1 in our agenda is the discussion and the review of the corporation's funding application process. That is 1A, and then the possible selection of a go team member, which is 1B. And so I think this was really brought forth by a number of questions about what is the process that we go through. And so part of what we want to do today is to lay that out, what we've been doing, and then have discussion if we want to change it. How do we change that and what we do? So I guess, EA, you're going to kind of walk us through
Yes,
what
sir.
we're doing today.
Yes, sir. We just have a brief presentation of materials to kind of help facilitate the conversation. Martin's bringing that up right now. It should be on all of your screens. Everybody good to go? Okay, good. So just a quick outline of what we'll be talking about today. And most of this information was covered back in June when we went through kind of the big orientation at that time. Of course, we've got two new members tonight, and so just kind of a little bit of a rehash, and then specifically honed in on the application process itself. So outline, talk a little bit about roles, city, EIC, KDC, and Go Team. We'll talk about the different EIC project types, and then we'll talk about the current project application process, because it does differ for some of those different project types. So again, just as background, the EIC does have an administrative services contract with the city. That's predominantly around engineering and project management, legal services, financial services, administrative support, investment support and audit, as well as project report and staffing on the actual applications as they're going through the process. EIC also has a contract with KDC, which is a 501c6 organization. That contract is currently a 3-year contract. It is set for expiration at the end of fiscal year 2018. So this is year 3 of the 3-year contract. And essentially KDC is going through, as many of you know, strategic planning effort right now and having various organizational discussions. And then the Go Team is really a subset, and it's outlined within the application itself, talking about the members that are part of that Go Team. But essentially it's city staff, typically right now Mr. McDaniel and myself. We may pull in other staff members within the city organization if necessary. The city attorney is often a part of that Go Team process. Usually one member of the EIC is appointed to that Go Team and is a representative of that, as well as KEDC. And usually that's fulfilled by the executive director of the KEDC. So again, just a little bit of background. Where EIC fits in the overall bigger scheme of economic development within the community. There's various economic development tools, and EIC sales tax funding is one of those mechanisms, but it's not the only mechanism available to the community. Obviously, the community assets that we put in place and that are already here are a big part of our economic development infrastructure. EIC, again, Chapter 380 is separate from the purview of EIC. That's really state legislation that allows cities to utilize sales tax and property tax. There's also hotel and motel tax. Sometimes that can be an implement that is utilized as an economic development tool under certain circumstances. And that, again, has its own set of parameters. Again, that's usually outside of the purview of the EIC. And then tax increment financing, which is also a different mechanism, and usually has a separate tax increment financing board and city council that is under that. So again, EIC is a critical component, certainly within Kerrville, but it's, again, not the only component of economic development tools that's out there. Funding partners, obviously, sometimes when applications are coming through, it's not the only mechanism that's being asked for. There may be other pieces and other entities, whether that's federal funding, funding from the state, potentially Kerr County. Chapter 381 is a complement to the Chapter 380 with the city organization, or there may be other nonprofits or local governments that are part of that application process as well, if it's a leveraged funding from various sources. So talking a little bit more specifically about the EIC funding component in that application process, there's really 3 primary project types that are allowed for funding to be applied for. And that are direct contributions to business development, usually focused around primary jobs and target areas, participation in public infrastructure, a lot of times via the city, but not always. As you know, we've had a recent application for public infrastructure that was from a private entity, and then quality of life applications. So I just want to walk through a little bit of the project application process, and you've got a little bit more in-depth. This is kind of a synopsis, but we have included within the packet of materials that we provided to you, and then also a hard copy today, the actual application that is received by folks that are interested in applying for funds. And on that second page, it really walks through the general process for the applications in a little bit more depth than what I've outlined here. But I tried to really differentiate between the business development projects and the public infrastructure and quality of life projects, because the process is a little bit different. So to start off, walking through the business development projects, essentially an application, a call may come in, either to the city or a lot of times to KDC. They come into the city, a lot of times we will refer them directly to KDC as kind of that clearinghouse at this time. They will walk them through the application and the application process, oftentimes assisting them with the actual filling out of the application. That is then reviewed by KDC, contacting the city. A GO team meeting is set up. Those application materials are brought in. The GO team reviews those application materials. If it's found feasible, there's really kind of a simultaneous effort to both make the EIC aware, put that on an upcoming EIC application. The KEC board also reviews that application and provides their recommendation to that. The EIC application then comes forward to this group. This group would review that application and then provide direction to staff on whether that direction is to move forward with the development of a legal document, a funding agreement. And then that is brought forward as well as a public hearing process. That public hearing can occur really on either one of those pieces. It doesn't necessarily have to be at the council piece. It typically is at the funding agreement stage. That funding agreement, if approved by the EIC, then goes to the City Council. City Council can review that and can approve or decline that. If it's approved, then that funding mechanism goes into place. There is a waiting period from when the point of time, a 60-day waiting period from when that point of time that the public hearing actually occurred. If it's denied, then that is essentially the end of that application process. So those are all related to the business development application process. Different from that is the public infrastructure and quality of life applications. So those, depending on whether those are city applications or whether it's from an outside entity, does change that process a little bit. If it's a city project, essentially city staff goes before the city council and seeks approval for them to even go before we even come to the EIC, because we want to make sure that we've got their blessing to come to you guys and begin the process. If it's an outside entity, obviously they may have boards or maybe a nonprofit or otherwise that they're going before they move that project forward and through the application process and coming before you. So if it's a city project, again, we seek council approval. Then we come to the city. If it's outside, then it really comes directly to the EIC for these two categories. The EIC application, whether it's city or outside, is then reviewed by the EIC, and if desired, the EIC can move it forward or again deny it or ask for additional information. If it is desired to move it forward, then staff again develops a funding agreement utilizing the city attorney's office, and then that funding agreement is brought forward to the EIC for approval, and if approved, then goes to council, same thing as the business development application. So that little bit of differentiation there between the two processes, or between the two application types.
Your example here is typically the city is the applicant.
Typically,
but
but not
council,
always.
if it is someone for public infrastructure like we currently have,
right,
that would not have gone to council first.
That's correct. That's correct.
That
Their principals difference. Essentially are approving moving that forward to the EIC directly. Right. Now there was review process on that application by staff and also by KDC initially.
Gotcha.
By KDC staff, I should say.
Okay.
Okay?
All right, has the EIC ever denied a city application for funds that you know of?
I don't know that. Mr. Hayes may know, I'm not sure.
I'm not aware, I can't remember.
Thanks.
One other, I guess, elaboration is that the other important function that KEDC performs is a economic impact analysis
Yes, thank you.
with third party. And so that comes along to the GO team when the GO team is evaluating the application. So the infrastructure projects, if it was a city-sponsored project, would not have that. But if it were something like the project that you all have been discussing with a developer, that would go through KEDC, and they would perform the economic impact analysis. They use a group out of Austin that does them all over the state. I've used them in other cities, so that's just one clarification.
Could you guys explain the function of the GO team? Either one of you?
And kind of, can I add this, before you begin, can you review who is on that? I mean, you mentioned there's an EIC representative, you also said city staff, and that can kind of vary. And then you mentioned KEDC staff.
That's correct.
Is there anybody else from the KEDC board that's a representative on the GO team?
No,
Okay.
not typically. Yeah, so your assessment is correct there,
Okay.
the members on there. And that staff piece does change. Like I said, typically it is myself, city manager, and city attorney, but we may bring out, particularly if it's a public infrastructure component, we may bring in other folks like the public works director or city engineer as well. So finance director potentially. I'm sorry, your other question?
His question.
It was, tell us what the GO team does and what, I guess, what their function is in this whole process.
Sure. So if you look to,
Page 7.
yeah, well, really, page 4 of 19. So there's a whole host of elements there that are within the principles and guidelines. And so, you know, the GO team essentially tries to get at what the heart of the application is, and looking at, you know, these different principles and guidelines for the EIC, and also just getting a better scope throughout the application, you know, kind of reading between the lines, I guess, if you will, and that way making sure the application is complete, making sure we have the right information for KDC to complete their impact analysis if they haven't done it at that point. But really just making sure that there's a completeness to the project and that it does fundamentally meet the principles and guidelines of the EIC.
So when, in point number 1 on page 4 says the payoff period of a business incentive to the city, is that language that would indicate that there's a cost-benefit analysis being done? Because I haven't seen any of those really. I can understand the difference between economic impact and a cost-benefit analysis. And when we get things, I don't seem to see a cost-benefit analysis.
Right.
Maybe a very good economic impact on the city, but it may be more than you want to spend for what you're getting.
That's right, and all of those, you know, again, it's not meant to, that GO team is not meant to supplant a policy board like yourselves. And so, you know, it is meant to take that information to the best degree that we can and to try to flesh some of those elements out, and some of those elements are intangible, and then to bring those forward to you guys.
Yeah, and I would also further add that one of the benefits that I see of today's discussion is clarity around what you define as you know, the cost-benefit analysis or return on investment versus what we've been doing, because I think that may be at the heart of some of the concerns, because we think we're talking the same language, but we may not be.
No.
So more definition around exactly the kinds of things that you as a board want to see as part of a process. So you might elaborate on that. We do, in this economic impact analysis, they do what I would call a cost-benefit analysis in terms of this is the total revenue from this project, both direct and indirect revenue, and this is the total costs to all the governing entities for that same period. So they do that, but y'all haven't seen that in the past,
No,
because in
we
the
haven't seen
past
it.
that has
That's
not
correct.
come to you. It's been distilled and then put in that memo form that you all saw, like on the project that we're currently talking about several months ago. So one of the things that we have talked about internally is let's just give them the study. You know, it's confidential. We don't like to leave things hanging out there and email things, but you know, I think that probably it might be appropriate just to email it and just put confidential on it, and then ask you guys to keep it confidential. So,
Mark, were you referencing the impact analysis? Is that part of what you were just talking about? Is that has not been forwarded on in the past?
Not the complete thing. It's been distilled in like a memo that it would explain, you know, these are the number of units, and this is what we expect the payback to be, and what the, you know, the cost of utility extension, and this is how much we'd get in revenue over X number of years in utility revenue. So that information has been highly summarized, but not the actual multi-page impact analysis.
Okay, thank you.
And I served on the GO team for, I guess, 3 years when it first was initiated. And the role that I took for EIC was one that when it came time to have the discussions about the project, the questions would come, did you guys look at those things, the cost-benefit analysis or the impact study, and flesh those out? And I could answer in detail what we went over. So that was how the role was explained to me as being the representative of the GO team was, you know, you needed to represent the interests of EIC and then also be the one that shared the detailed information that was gone over at that level.
Yeah, a lot of that has to do with the fact that, and not recently, but it could be that we have a prospect that doesn't want to be named because of competitors, because of a number of reasons. And so it might even be listed on your agenda as, you know, some code name or Project A or whatever. And so if that information goes out electronically, you know, part of the arguments about why economic development should not be a city function or a city department versus KEDC is because lots of public information, if it's a different environment in terms of keeping things confidential, and if we've got a hot prospect that's bringing 300 jobs, we don't want to jeopardize that. So that's why I think in the past the process has been to have one of you, maybe there needs to be two of you, I don't know, come in and look at the information with the staff to help convey that back, and then you kind of protect yourself a little bit about, you know, the confidentiality until it's ready to be public.
Sure. All right. Any other questions?
This may be the wrong time to ask. Can I ask a question about these economic impact studies, or just out of curiosity?
Sure.
Like there was an article in the paper a few weeks ago, I guess talking about the tournaments, I think the athletic complex, and how many people come, you know, how it generates and dollars per person and that. Is that broken down by, you know, kind of region? In other words, you know, Kerrville's hotel prices are different, say, than Austin or Dallas or Houston. Is that just kind of a standardized study? Do you have any idea how that's done?
I know the one you're referencing, and I'm not sure if Mr. McIlvain of CB, he's the one who had facilitated that. I'm not sure if it's our typical source that KDC utilizes. I think it is separate. I think they utilize some hotel, motel facilities for that, and some other studies in there. So I think it is different from the KDC, which usually uses impact data sources, which is more statewide metrics.
Thanks.
Yeah, and remember, that would have been maybe it wasn't, may have been a quality of life project versus one of these others. And so we don't hire, technically, KEDC to evaluate it and perform that economic impact analysis. So Charlie was doing it, as EA said, using industry standards. If he honed in on this market or not, I'm not sure, but we don't necessarily look at that close at the return on the investment on the quality of life projects like the River Trail and others. But I think it's there, but it'd be a different kind of study.
Mark, when was the last time this application was brought up to visit? How long?
Form?
Yeah.
So I believe that there have been slight modifications to it over some period of time, but I believe it was adopted by both entities in the 2009, 2010 timeframe. There was quite a bit of discussion going on right then, and there was some reformulation of KDC, I believe, at that time. So that's when that application process was formally adopted. There have been some slight tweaks to it, and staff has had an opportunity to go through here. There are some elements, as you'll see, for instance, like the community events is still listed as a category. Several years ago, it's my understanding that that really has shifted outside of EIC purview, really back to the council and CVB, and was utilized in a different way. So, I think staff would be recommending, going in and doing some cleanup of just sort of the functional items that have occurred over the last.
So have you all looked
years.
at it for some changes now that you believe that should be made?
We have. We've got some red lines that we'd like to bring forward if it's the desire of this body.
I think one of the reasons that the cost benefit analysis or return on investment business talk is important is this is an issue that the taxpayer basically looks at. I mean, they may look at a lot of things, but what they really want to know is, are we spending our money wisely? And the EIC is obviously, while we're not a fiduciary capacity to the taxpayer, we're clearly in a good stewardship capacity for the tax funds. And I think it's important to know how much we spent versus like what's the return on that. And Riverwalk, we can understand in quality of life projects. We know you can't monetize a lot of that, but a lot of people really, they're either going to like that project or they're not going to like that kind of project. But I think there's an esoteric value to things like that are just as important, but I still think the analysis needs to take that into consideration. In other words, you need to have a factor in there, a quality of life factor, if you want to call it that. And it's just an issue that every time anybody talks to me about any kind of project, it's like, well, how much did you spend, and when are we going to get it back, and what's the return? And these are the questions they ask. They may not even care who the person is or what the project is, but they're really concerned about, are they getting the best bang for their buck?
So, Mr. Cooper, are you referring to the quality of life projects or the other?
Any project. I mean,
Okay.
the regular taxpayer out here wants to know that their money is being spent wisely, frankly, and wisely to them means what's the return on that? In other words, don't mind paying for a new park, and everybody can use it. That's really great dog park, whatever the deal is. But
Yeah, I mean, we could probably look at hiring an economist, much like Bill that we have on our comprehensive plan team or something like that, to perform an analysis on some of the quality of life projects, but it's only going to be as good as the assumptions that go into it.
Right.
But it'll at least be something. We could look at doing something like that. And then on the other projects, we have that information. It's just that we oftentimes can't release it until the end of the project, and then it's all public, and because you guys are approving contracts and so on and so forth.
right,
So.
agreed. But there's Dan.
The public, I think what he's getting at is basically what I run into is they want to know during the process that we're asking these questions. And if all the questions we're allowed to ask are behind closed doors, then we need to come out with some sort of question that, like Kenneth is saying, he gets asked something, other than just saying, we've looked at that. We need to give him something that he can say to make it credible that he's really looked at it. And everything is public after the fact, but at that point, it's too late for anybody to do anything about it. And the public wants to know a little more about what went into the process, I think.
Right, and I think that's something that y'all could do as part of your meeting, whether we list it on the agenda that you'll be looking at, almost like the Planning and Zoning Commission does when they're looking at a zoning case or a CUP. Here's the 6 criteria that we'll be looking at, and this is what we'll be discussing behind closed doors. But beyond that, I'm not sure what else you could do because you
Yeah.
can't share the information.
Right.
Because the other questions I think that don't get asked is what, for lack of a better term, is opportunity cost. So I would like to see where we're showing the benefits of doing whatever the project is. We're showing the true cost of doing that project. And then we're going to show some sort of answer to the question of what happens to the city if we don't do the project. So, basically getting a
The
is status quo better.
but-for question.
Yeah.
Yeah. We can talk to some of the folks that we work with to see how they might get at that and come back to you all with some suggestions.
Mark, let me ask you a question. Other cities our size, I don't know if you have any experience, do you know the balance that cities 25, 30, 35,000. As far as the use of economic development funds between, quote, quality of life projects and economic development projects, and where do we stand, if you have any idea? Because
There is no rule. It's
Yeah.
all over the place. It's a community local decision.
Okay.
And yeah, every city's different. In Tyler, it was 100% infrastructure. And, other places, it's primarily quality of life.
And when you say infrastructure, was that also for job development creation too, or just strictly just doing
Streets,
city?
police stations, airports, fire stations.
So basically, it became an adjunct of the city budget.
That's the way it was approved by the voters.
Thank you.
In the past, we have, as you can see on the budget that was given you, we tried to categorize that into those three categories and keep it even as much as we could, so that we're not too far off or overweighted in any one of those three categories. And so you can kind of see how the budget was laid out there. We've moved a little bit, just because there were more Category 2 projects, but it's pretty close to what the Category 3 projects are for your 18 and your 19 budgets. Well, 19 being not as much, but again, you can see what the 5, I guess 6 years of budgets are that are there, and how that's been somewhat structured from the various categories.
I got a question sort of about the application itself. Just something to consider. We classify them in these 3 different broad categories. What would be the harm in, there's really just a finite, best I can tell, there's like 10. If the application, instead of doing these categories, why don't we just list the approved 4B project type that this application is going to go in under? Like, because there is no quality of life, right? There's just these, like I say, the best I could do is extrapolate out 10. Is there any drawback that somebody can tell to listen to the project? The benefit to doing it would be if the project type is more specific, then we don't get these other questions where people are debating, is that approved, valid 4B spending? And you'd also catch some other things that if you list the project in the correct type, you wouldn't have, well, not to get all negative, just it would clean up the process, I think, if we did that. Would there be a problem to doing that?
Are you referring to the statute and having
Yeah, I mean,
applicants
there's
try
all-
to determine where they fall within
Well,
the categories of the statute?
Yeah, but they aren't going to be doing it on their own. I mean, we're essentially walking them through this with either a staff or a KEDC person, so they would have the guidance to know. And that person can also tell them, you know what, your project is unallowable if you call it that, but here's this topic that you are allowed to do it, and maybe we can craft your proposal under that. And then we don't have the after the fact questioning later.
Covering the doctor's bill for insurance?
Yeah, exactly. Because, anyways.
That's certainly something we could look at. There'll probably be a city consultation, city attorney consultation point that we'll have to, sort of assume that maybe that does not occur until that GO team review, that the application is complete except for maybe the category which it would fall under. Because I'm not sure KDC will always, that representative may not always know exactly where it needs to fall within the legal realm, but we can certainly look at that.
Yeah, well, the point is that when it comes to EIC,
Right.
that determination should already be made.
Sure.
And like the athletic complex, he asked the question. It was brought forward as an economic development and then changed after, it mutated into quality of life. Had it mutated into the acceptable thing, which is the sports venue, then we also would have had to vote on it in public just to do the project, not the funding. So we'd get around those problems that kind of rear their head later.
Right. Right.
So-
And the trick I think we fall into are that, you know, these applications aren't always cleanly in one particular category. You know, oftentimes they have multiple benefits across, you know, the public infrastructure may have a quality of life component. It may also have a business development component. So it is, there may be multiple categories that end up being listed within that application.
That's okay.
And maybe that's more beneficial. 'Cause
Yeah,
it
I mean,
gives you guys-
putting what it falls under is really all it is, so that it just acknowledges to everybody that legal has already looked at it, that this is legal to do this, you know?
Keep in mind that, and I've told you all this before, when the grant agreements come to you all, it's listed out there, all the specific state law provisions that it's under. Because you all make findings.
Right.
And so to say that the public doesn't know, well, you can give them that front page or 2 pages of the grant agreement, and it's listed right there. The specific sections in the law that you all are finding that, or at least the majority of y'all are finding, complies in the way you're funding it.
Right, but in the vocabulary of the public, they've got this notion that it's quality of life, okay? Well, I can put my head around quality of life, but everything that somebody might consider quality of life is not approved for B funding. And so it would be, I think, helpful in the public forum if we stopped using that as the term and start saying, because it's, like I say, it's a finite number, it's a very small number. I thought it was more. So they'd be walking around going, well, that's an EIC sports venue project. No problem. You know, it would just, I think it would make that discussion a lot less opinion driven and more just, you know, fact.
I think the quality of life comes from a more general aspect of what the city is clued into and part of its goals, council's goals. And so the offshoot of that is you all kind of, you know, are under that umbrella as well. And so I think that's where it started with the quality of life.
Yeah.
But as soon as it gets from the Go team, which I mean, I don't think I've ever been invited or been a part of a Go team, so to make that clear, which is fine. But as soon as it kind of comes out of that meeting and they say we want to go forward with this and we want to present this to EIC, that's when I start kind of ginning up a funding agreement. And those sections, again, are built right in. And it doesn't say, you'll notice it doesn't say quality of life anywhere.
I think it could be, quality of life can be interpreted different by so many people. I think that's what you.
No, I understand what he's saying. I'm just
Yeah.
saying you all, you know, and I've heard that, Councilmember Brody before, but again, you know, as soon as this grant agreement goes to the EIC, it's part of your packet,
Yeah.
it's online, and, you know, and that's why I get you all to really pay attention to most of the terms, maybe not the boilerplate terms of the agreement, but certainly that front page where the whereases, because that's where you all are dropping down into those specific sections of the law that you all are making a finding. This is why we're going to make this funding based on these sections.
Yeah, and I can see also where over time it could change, right? So initially the application comes in, even after it comes out of the Go team, and it's XYZ project under one category. And then as you all evaluate the project as a board, there may be questions and even asks to change the project to do a certain thing, and all of a sudden it could end up being something else. But so I think we have to be flexible enough to, you know, to be open to that. But as far as anything that would help you, I think the goal here should be more what would help you all do the best job possible to evaluate a project. And I think the rest of it takes care of itself.
Yeah.
And so that's probably one of the items that we could do.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It actually, in my head, it absolutely helps us evaluate it. The flexibility is, this is written down on paper or typed in a computer. If it morphs into a different project type, just retype it into the thing. You know, it's just changed.
Yeah, I'm just saying
Yeah.
early on, maybe one thing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, yeah. But it's certainly a lot easier to evaluate something if it's specific as opposed to the quality of life, you know, generic term. So
You're saying in the application itself versus the funding agreement where he does get very specific, right?
correct.
Okay.
So is that setting a policy that these are the 6 quality of life projects we would entertain? I mean, is that really kind of where you're going?
No, I'm going where we apply the law that underscores what we're allowed to approve. And so I'm just saying, there are just 10 of them, but they're somewhat general in their type. It doesn't say like, you know, McDonald's restaurant is this. So I'm saying you could cite the code number and the generic or the headline title. Like they had one that's 505-153, affordable housing. Okay, that's one. So just use those instead of this term and do our vetting. I mean, if they're going to vet the projects, vet it as an approved
Here?
type.
Kind of like it in the application, or this is the guidelines and the.
Yeah, like
procedure?
I'm thinking more in terms of like
Oh,
up
there.
here, it's got there, just it'd be a drop down that they choose the right one, or list multiples, you know, whatever it is.
I see that now. I was getting a little confused there.
Yeah.
But
Mark, how much flexibility in your past, when you handled this, did you have when you look at a quality of life project, and it's, I mean, you can go a lot of different avenues, but you've done this, you've been around it a lot.
Yeah, most all of the, I mean, you have the state law certainly, but correct me if I'm wrong, in my experience, a lot of it's just policy driven. And it's really hard to challenge a governing body when they make a decision about what they define under the law as quality of life or as infrastructure or what have you. As long as there can be some sort of nexus, there can be some sort of, and, you know, you got legal representation to tell you whether or not you're taking risk or not. You know, I think it's really, it's not completely open-ended for sure, but what we've been doing is similar to what other cities have been doing.
So hypothetically, we could leave it in, or we could take it out, because we still have flexibility.
Sure. Sure, we could do what Mr. Baruti said and include however many categories and even include other, just in
Right,
case we needed
exactly.
another. Or not, we can keep it the way it is. But again, I think we need to focus on what is it that y'all need to be able to make some good decisions.
So in reference to looking at that application, if I may, I don't know, that would be something that the city could look at also? If you
Sure.
had, that you've seen, it's probably time to update it anyways,
Yeah.
and I'm sure, you know, being new, you probably looked at it, but I think that's would help us out too.
Right, and to be honest with you, part of what we've been waiting on is to what's gonna happen with what I keep calling DC 2.0 and what that's gonna look like and how is your process gonna dovetail with their process and before we just go and overhaul ours. And that, you know, so this isn't gonna happen, I don't think, today. We bring you back different versions over time, and as that process, you know, continues. And I keep pointing back to Mike, he's the chair of the board. And I appreciate you being here today, Mike.
Mark, let me ask you, what, in your estimation, would not be a project that couldn't be funded from EIC?
Super Bowl stadium?
I think that's covered.
yeah, that is good.
Yeah.
That would be,
You know, it's pretty open. I do have an answer for you. A project that is maintenance, so like street maintenance, you
Right.
could go out and do slurry seal and things such as that. Reconstruction probably would qualify, but
You
not
mentioned-
maintenance, operation and maintenance types of activities.
you mentioned, I thought, when you're in Tyler, like a fire station or this or that, you think that comes under the code?
We did then.
Okay.
I'll say this, when I
Nice answer, by the way.
first got here,
Bypasses today.
when I first got here, we were doing streets. We were using streets at time, or 4B money for streets tied to residential areas. And that law was changed a bit,
Yes.
tightened up. At some point, we talked about doing a fire station, and I think we even did one. I think we did the one over by Tally with some 4B funds. I could be wrong, but that has tightened up. And so occasionally, I haven't seen it in a long time, but occasionally some city with their 4B or 4A will go off and do something that's just crazy. They'll get challenged. The legislature will get a hold of it and they'll tighten it up. And so, you know, you got to look at what the legislature does each time. They haven't done that in a while. But I can't envision you all, well, you know, going through and doing street maintenance for tied to residential areas or maybe even another fire station without me, trying to get y'all to tap the brakes, really look at it, so.
When I read the code, and I'm not a lawyer, obviously, it seems to me like it speaks of infrastructure tied to projects of economic development as well,
It says, if you look at it, it says business enterprises. So that's, pretty broad.
So, yeah.
So you all have to make that finding, and if you look at the grant agreements that'll come before you, I'll lead you through the steps, and you gotta be comfortable, as a commission, making that finding.
So on, kind of shifting gears a little bit, some of the other stuff we're discussing today, I assume, is kind of what impacts or criteria we want to see evaluated on applications. Is that right? That's kind of what we're, okay. So you got that list of them on wherever it was. You said page 4. And a couple that I'd like to see somehow, and I don't have the how answered, okay, but I'd like to see some version of quantifying the effect to a couple of things. One is, and this would apply to any of the projects, whether it's quality of life or not. If it's going to have a positive, negative, or status quo effect on something like the gap between the housing costs and wages that are being earned in town. So is this bringing us, say it's bringing us jobs, but it's bringing us jobs that pay $5 an hour. Obviously, that's not going to affect it's going to negatively affect that gap. Another one would be, I mentioned the other day at that economic summit, I'd like to see us start evaluating all projects with some eye towards the effect on the current status of 60% of our students are on subsidized meals in the schools. So I'm not saying this project has to solve that problem, but if someone presents information that shows it is negatively impacting that number, that would obviously be something I'd want to hear.
Yeah, so what happens when the project on a business enterprise comes through to KEDC, they have a matrix that they use.
Okay.
They look at capital investment, and they also look at jobs created, and they look at average wage. And so there are some bars there, and I think right now the KEDC board is discussing some adjustments to the criteria, the matrix.
Right.
So that's where that would come into play, and there'd be an item on the application that would say, where does it fit into the matrix,
Yeah.
and how did you calculate the incentive based upon the matrix?
Right.
But obviously, a job is a good job is the best way to deal with the 60% poverty issue.
Yeah, I like that thought, but I don't know how you quantify that.
Well, I can tell you one way, and it's not a perfect way, is that we've been doing things. We've had these projects going this way, and that number has been increasing over the last 10 years. It's increased by 25%. So clearly, whatever we're doing now in our economic development isn't positively impacting that.
But what if economic development has no impact on that at all?
Or what if it mitigates it, actually? There's
Yeah.
a mitigating factor. Perhaps those numbers would look even worse.
Maybe so, but if we don't start looking at it, I think we're being, my own self, I just would like to see it be highlighted and looked at, and when something comes in and all we're doing is padding the upper, we have a gap in our economy. We have a lot of money in town, but we have that gap. And I'm not suggesting a welfare state, but if every economic development just goes up high, then what have we really done?
Well, I think that's where the average wage floor comes in that you all would. So you're not going to incentivize jobs, for example, that pay $7 an hour. You're going to incentivize jobs that pay X dollars an hour, and that might be part of your matrix. That's how we get to that issue. But I think directly getting at the child poverty issue, the only way to do that is with good jobs, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, because
so it wouldn't negatively, but
yeah, because I'm not actually talking. It's not really about the child poverty. So it's really just that's a statistic that's out there that certainly references overall economic strength in our community, and so that's just a number that has been quantified. So if someone can tell me how it's going to affect overall economic impact or quality, so be it. But don't just tell me dollars to the community, because that's not actually telling me how it's affecting the people. It's telling me how it's affecting a bottom line of somebody. You know what I'm saying? So like, for instance, there is a matrix in there. I think KDC's number is $15 an hour or something. They give points based on that number. I could be wrong. Does anybody know?
It's somewhere like
So,
that.
okay,
Yeah.
so if jobs are coming in and they're less than that, then I would guess that's below the mark, and you know, maybe we should be going after something that's a little more, and that gets into what happens to us if we do the project, what happens to it if we don't, kind of what she was
Right,
talking
so
about.
if it's less than 50, let's just say 15 is the benchmark, at
Right.
least 15, then that application many times would not even make it here if it was less, because it didn't meet the matrix.
But what about if it met it later on? What if there's another avenue in there? I mean,
Well, it actually would make it, because it's a point system, so they weighted it as one of the points. I think James Avery is one that the average salary of the jobs brought in was lower than that. But in the point system, they just didn't get as many points for that. They probably got points for something else.
Capital investment
Yeah,
or
you know,
whatever.
whatever it is. So you could still bring the jobs in, but have we done a good thing to benefit more if we brought in a lot more jobs that are less? You know, maybe we should weight that criteria heavier. I don't know. I'm
So how do we
suggesting.
know how we can impact that? How do we know what jobs or what things will impact that? I mean, what?
That's the reason
No, I know, but
yeah.
you can say that we want to do that, and sure, I think we all want to do that, but how?
How, right.
And so you can't just say, we want this, but we gotta have some way to measure how are we gonna do that? It's not just the jobs, apparently. I mean, we say we got this high percentage of people, of the kids that need assistance, and yet we don't have any low-income housing.
Right.
Where does that come together? You know, if we've got all these kids, where the hell are they living?
They're living in combined families in one house.
Yes.
That's actually what they're doing.
Yes.
So, but your question is valid. I mean, truly, the how part isn't.
Unless we know a how, or
Right.
really, we can't hardly put it in the formula.
Right. So I'm not suggesting that I have that answered. I'm saying that if we don't ask the question, then we'll never get it. So I'm just throwing it out there because I think it needs to be asked. And, you know, that's why it's there. I mean, it's an awareness thing that is, as long as I have a microphone, it's going to be made more aware. That's all. That's kind of what it is.
I don't know where to go with that, because again, I agree with Kent. I don't know that there's a way to measure that. I like the fact that it's in the matrix that KDC uses.
Well, I think it's probably appropriate that when we come back and have the discussion with some of these other items that you've all asked for, is the matrix, and let you all review that, comment on it.
That may help. That's a good idea.
I think that addresses, George, I think this addresses what we're thinking, is that if a company's coming in and a number of their jobs are $11 or $12 an hour, a disproportionate, let's say, then that gives a different weighting factor. I don't know how the weighing is done,
Yeah.
but if that's something that, you know, if otherwise it'd be a 12, but the fact that 70% of their jobs are under $15 an hour, now they drop down to a 10 or something. 10 sounds good, but I mean, not from 12, 10 doesn't sound so good.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying it has less impact. Still doesn't mean you don't do the deal.
Right.
It's just that if you're comparing two different transactions, then maybe that one doesn't get the funding, whereas this one did.
Or also on the matrix, and I don't know that I've seen it this way, but we might have negative points for specific impacts. I don't think they have that in there, but so instead of just adding up points, you actually take a hit on your project if you've got something,
Yeah,
you
that's
know,
what I
like
was
carbon
saying.
credits
Yeah,
type of
you just-
thing, you know.
Well, I've done this before too. What we could do is take 3 hypothetical scenarios and run them through the matrix, so that when y'all are discussing the matrix, you can see the impact
Yeah.
of it. I mean, you can do your own math, obviously,
Right.
but there could be
be helpful.
Yeah, that would be.
Mark, let me ask you, off the topic here, on a, what interest or what tax rate, is there a blended tax rate, for example, you know, for every dollar spent, the city, I guess with the 0.5% for the EIC and the 1.5% for the city, theoretically, we get 2% on a dollar spent, let's say at the athletic complex or something. Does that make sense? In other words, I go to the athletic complex and I rent the field for whatever, 2% of that is going to come back theoretically to the EIC and the city. Is that right? The sales tax on that.
You'll see that in the analysis that this third party does for us
Right.
on the business prospects, but not on the quality of life stuff.
Okay, and that's fine. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is, I'm trying to be fair about it because I try to look at things that, you know, what do we need to generate to get our money back or this or that. But we get other monies, like I'm ignorant of this, hotel tax. I mean, is there a higher, you know, a higher rate of than the 2%, maybe a blended rate of taxes on you know, hotel tax, whatever, that would actually raise the rate of, I'm using the term rate of return just because that's how I think. Even, do you get what I'm getting at?
That certain projects might have a higher rate of return than others, is that what you're?
Yeah, in other words, if you're
Just by
bringing,
the
if you're
type of
bringing in
industry it
people into
is.
the hotels and this and that, you're gonna
Yeah.
get a higher, and I don't know how much that goes to the city or what if it's dedicated.
Yeah,
to
if
certain
Charlie
projects.
were here, he could tell you what the industry standard is, and
Okay.
for every dollar you spend.
But it's
you
probably
get
more than
X.
2%, I would think.
I would think so.
What was the multiplier factor for
That
businesses
too.
generated? So
Right.
we create more jobs. I mean, there's some standard
Right.
multiplier
I have
factors.
an issue with that, but that's
But
another.
those hotel motel taxes, they're tied down a little tighter than what you can spend them for. I mean,
Right.
they're a lot tighter than.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
Initially.
certainly the multiplier may be, you may disagree with the multiplier, but you would have to think that, I mean, at least if there's more business happening, it does have some kind of increased impact, whether you think the multiplier's 1.5 or 7, I don't know, whatever. You know, I mean, it's pretty clear too. It gives you scenarios where you can't use the money.
Well, Charlie McIlvain at the Chamber Economic Summit, Hill Country Economic Summit, laid that out pretty good. He actually put in all these factors. It was really, I thought it was a good presentation. It was helpful.
Okay, so any other questions? I saw there were a lot going on. Some wanted to ask questions and maybe didn't. So did we get our questions answered?
I have one. You know, how much data do you want coming to the full board in terms of financials, pro formas, you know, all the background information? You know, this is not review of a bank loan, and it's different in terms of process. But I want to kind of get to the end of this as quickly as we can in terms of bringing you back something that you all might finalize. So any thoughts around that subject?
I think that the information should be complete relative to the project, not particularly relative to the developer, although that's very important. We don't need to see their financials, but we need to see the project's financials. I think that would be much more significant to me. That's how I would look at the deal. And so maybe if that's an answer.
Yeah, it is, and that's
Okay.
helpful, especially if it's a deal where it's a reimbursement basis and they've already spent the money. Yeah.
So let me clarify that. So the project itself, minus the name, which would basically be the income and the taxes and all
Basically
of the
a pro
factors,
forma
a
on the
pro forma
project.
of the project, and the economic impact it has.
Right.
So all of that rolled in together. Is
Right.
that part of what the study is we get? Does it start there? Is that part of that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought it was, but so I was asking that to kind of get clarification on a separate set of documents just for that, or extrapolate it out for all of the economic impact.
Well, here's something else
Which
too,
one?
is I think what we have to do
I
is
think
share one of
there's-
these with you,
Okay, I think
a
there's
real
two-
one,
Yeah, go ahead.
a real impact analysis with you, one that's recently been done. Because we talked about doing that as part of, you know, your efforts on current projects. And you'll be able to see what's in there. And so as we move through this process, if that's not getting at the question that you still have, then, we'll know.
Okay.
You know, because I have the question, speaking to that, I have the question on, do we as a board actually need those detailed pro formas individually, us? Or do we need a synopsis from, I mean, who's actually running the numbers? You know, I mean, is the city, if the city's reviewing this, I don't know how the process is currently working. But if
That's
it's-
what happens.
Yeah, so if you all are doing the review regularly on these kinds of things, and you bring us a synopsis of that, and you talk about, you know, how does it cash flow, how, you know, here's the numbers that we have in our performance without giving us those detailed, financials, you know, maybe that's a better, you know, I think I heard a comment before about, well, you know, I mean, we do have jobs that we have to do on our own, so where's the time for us to be reviewing these things? If you're reviewing these items, do we need the detail, or do we just need a synopsis about the pro formas?
Well, that's really
and
the
the
question,
income?
right?
And,
So that's
and
what.
maybe the understanding of how the sausage is made is the first step, and then a executive summary after we know kind of what the pieces are. Would that work?
Right. I think there's hard numbers and soft numbers. And the hard numbers are dollars spent, dollars received, and the soft numbers are economic impact and how many other things there are in there. If that is presented in an understandable way, and so that we can get an idea of the economics of the project without how the sausage is made,
Right.
so to speak,
Right.
without that aspect of it, that's fine. The only one of these that I've had the opportunity to review was woefully short of that information.
That's my concern, is
You know,
because
it was.
what we went through is a process that we've gone through in the past where we did summarize it. We did what Ms. Patillo was mentioning, but it was not sufficient for you all, which is fine, because that's, y'all wanted some more information. And so what I'm just trying to get at is, what is that? Or is it more about the process where you've got maybe not one board member, or maybe two board members on the GO team to review it with us, and then you have that whole confidentiality factor that I mentioned earlier. So
Can I
So where does the responsibility lie for the financials? Who's responsible for financials? I mean, you got city involved, you got KEDC involved, you got here involved, and so somebody needs to have the responsibility pinned to them, whoever that is.
in the past, it has been the city staff, and we'll pull in the city's CFO or whomever we need to evaluate that. I'm not sure if we got anything from KEDC in the past on looking at, I mean, to the extent that they do the impact analysis, it's more on the pro forma basis, not their company financials.
Mark, I'm a detail guy, so I like the detail, because it makes me ask questions and look at things. And y'all gonna have that information anyways, so how many times you have to go back and get information from the board if they ask questions, because everybody has a different mindset how they do things. So,
that was kind of where I was going to go. Basically, if we're not, I don't think we're asking, we're talking about enormous amount of details. These are things that have already been worked up anyways, right? So if they were, I would say as a normal default, you're going to display the summary. But if it's already been worked up, then have it ready when someone asks for it, type of thing.
Well, we want to share whatever with one member what we share with all members.
Right.
So
No, I don't mean like that. I mean, like, as a
initially.
general rule, yeah, as a general rule, everybody's just looking for the summary. But we read the summary like, I sure would like to see something. Then you've got it there in the discussion, and say we're in executive session or whatever. It's part of what comes out. You don't have to present it as part of the package.
Well, we'll have you look at an actual impact analysis.
Yeah.
And then y'all can tell us if that's sufficient or not. So we'll bring that back.
Mark, let me ask you this. I understand the idea of the pro forma for the project itself, but I think that having some financials on the actual applicant is also important, because if an applicant starts, if we don't know what the debt of the applicant is, or we don't know, their cash flow, or then if they get in trouble halfway through a project and they can't complete the project, then we have an issue. And so, I mean, I know there's a balance, because people don't want to But usually when you go get a loan or whatever, you get a car loan, something, you gotta show 3 years of your tax return or 12 years, you know what I'm saying? And I don't know what the answer is, but I don't think it's unreasonable to try to determine the financial viability of anybody we're doing business with.
Robert's exactly right, because you can't, you gotta know, even if you're just reimbursing expenses, if you don't know the strength, the financial strength of the developer, then you don't know that you can finish, and you can leave you in the middle. And so whether we need all those details, somebody needs to be if doing that, but again, the summary of those things would be good, I think.
But you know, our current currently that's required, according to this. I mean, they've got to provide 5 years of annual financials, statement of P&L, balance sheet, cash flow statement, IRS, reporting forms, et cetera.
So that would be shown to the staff, but not all of you in the past.
Right,
So,
and I'm good with that. And I love numbers, and I love analyzing, but it's not my role, as I see it.
well, so this is a little bit different than a bank, right?
A little bit.
I mean, it is. It's a public process.
So again, maybe the steps that we take, and I think you've already mentioned this, is kind of show us how the sausage is made, which is gonna be bring us and let us look at it on a, what do you call it, well, would be a real deal, I suppose, right?
I need to visit with EA to see what we've got.
And then
So it wouldn't just be a
see what it
summary is
looks
what
like.
you're saying? but
Well,
then show us what they
show us
have.
what's behind it and what you're
Right,
doing
and then
to
we
get us
determine
there,
what we
and then
think.
we can maybe agree to a summary
Right.
based on this is what's happening
Right.
in the back.
Right.
This is
No, I
it.
think if we agree to
This is the work we're
to
doing.
the information we're looking for, or this ratio, that ratio,
Correct.
or whatever, then we get those ratios, then we're probably,
Yeah,
we'll be
And
fine.
type of project brings something different anyways, I mean.
yeah.
Sure.
But both for the project and the developer, I think.
Okay.
I mean, that would be my vote.
I agree.
Okay.
All right.
So, Mr. Chair, what we'll do is we'll look at getting at some of the other criteria that's been suggested. Both what Mr. Naaman mentioned and Mr. Baruti, opportunity cost, right, and something about quality of life. I'll just talk to some economists and see what they might have, and we'll give you some suggestions if any. Then we'll bring you back a revised application, and we'll try to get to the listing that you mentioned just as another draft, and then we'll give you a sample of what a economic impact analysis looks like from this third party that we get. Anything else I'm missing?
I've got a different, it's sort of an off question. The application process absolutely cannot, like, everything has to go to KEDC first, is that correct?
Not everything, not if it's not a quality of life project.
So, you mean everything, quality of life projects won't go to KEDC first?
Right,
Okay, but all others will?
currently.
Okay. Okay. Is that a rule somewhere, or is that just a policy the way we've done it? The only reason I ask is because, as a board, this one, do we want to cede complete authority of what gets percolated up? I understand it's a vetting tool, but is it a required vetting tool, I guess is what I'm saying.
It's not, but I think you need to be careful to think through that it's not just about EIC funding. I mean, I think EIC funding is obviously the big possible incentive, but there's tax abatements and all sorts of other things
Right.
that may not even involve this group. And so you wouldn't want every application to come through you first necessarily.
I get that. I'm just,
Yeah.
I suppose that's the purpose though of the GO team, to address that.
Yeah, a lot of
You're not
things are
really
vetted
se-
at
You're
that
not
point.
necessarily seeding it if you have representation. I mean, would you agree?
sort of. I mean, it's not a big point. I just was asking if it was really
Yeah.
if it was a requirement, I guess.
Well, and, you know, part of this is also wrapped up into what the future of KEDC is. And, you know, I think that's going to be culminating here within the next 30 days or so. And if they look differently and act differently, then the process probably needs to change. So,
So Mark, should we wait to see what happens before we look into the process, or just work on the draft process now and see where it goes?
the latter, yeah, sure. Mhm.
If it goes away, we'll have to
Well,
change.
I wasn't thinking like that, I was
Well,
just
but
thinking
if it
change.
did, we'd have to change process anyway, or if it changes abruptly, away from where it is, we might have to change it anyway. So if we start kind of thinking about.
Starting, yeah, that's what I'm saying, I'd
that's
hate
good.
to hardline
Get out
it
in
right
front
now,
of
and
it.
then all of a sudden you have some changes and we need to do it again.
Exactly. Which brings to question item 1B, which is the GO team. Will the GO team always exist?
Not necessarily. I mean, if you all
So shall
see
we
a different.
wait before we put someone on there, or do you need someone on?
We
the
need
GO team
someone
now?
because we actually have an application and another one on the way.
I'd like to see two people go on there, I just think, like you said, yeah, everybody has another job, you never know when you can't be there.
So Mike, if we put 2 members of our committee of our board on a committee, what are the legal ramifications of
Then
that?
per your bylaws, you'd have to provide notice of that meeting, and, you know, there goes the confidentiality. Well, I mean, you throw your hands up, and then that
Well,
meeting's
it's
open.
executive session, when you're talking about it, you don't discuss it when you come out, right?
Well, I think there's more to it than that. I think you probably
What
need
is
to
it?
look. Pardon?
What do you mean?
Well, I think you're opening up the process where I mean, one, you're gonna have to go into the KEDC agreement, because that's all part of that, the way EIC operates with KEDC, and then 2, you're gonna have to look at your bylaws.
Okay.
If we had 2 members?
That's
Yeah.
not a
Right.
quorum.
Because that's a
Because
committee.
Committee
Yeah.
and
Arguably, it
committees
becomes a
have to
committee of
be,
EIC.
But that's not the case if it's one,
Right.
or we could change the bylaws.
Right. I'm just saying, I'm not suggesting it's good or bad or indifferent. You just have to, there's more to it than
Well, it was
adding
just-
another member.
How about appointing one now, and then we can look at amending the bylaws or whatever you need to do to.
Oh, the only reason I brought it up, because it came up about having 2 on there.
Well, I like the idea of
I
having
like the
2 on
idea
there.
too.
The more the better.
Yeah,
And
but 1 now is what he
Right.
needs, so
So-
deliver 1 now and do what we need to do.
currently, our bylaws say that it constitutes a committee if there's more than 1 member, and committees have to be subject to the Open Meetings Act by bylaw, not by state law. And so, therefore, those would be subject to
Right.
the rules of open meetings.
Cool.
Now, if we change our bylaws, that requires city council to approve that change. The board approves the change first, city
Right.
council approves it next. And we can certainly, probably entertain doing that, but I like,
We may have other bylaw changes that y'all want by the time we get through this. Right.
true. But I like Mark's suggestion, do 1 for now and consider that.
Mhm.
Is the GO team an informal meeting? That's what happens? Okay.
And it can be called pretty quick. And multiple times. So, anyway, so I will move on to item 1B. If there is no more discussion of 1A, let me finish that one first.
So we could name an alternate to the GO team in case one person couldn't be there?
That's always
That-
possible.
Well, I mean, that's at least,
Good
you just
idea.
have one
I like
that way.
Sure.
I
That's
mean,
a great, I like that idea.
I do too. So, moving on to item 1B, which would be the appointment of someone to the GO team, and I like the idea of appointing a primary and an alternate. And so I will entertain a motion.
I guess I'd like, I'd like to hear who on this board has an interest in being on the GO team.
I don't mind, and I don't mind being an alternate either.
No, I'll do it. I mean, I'd throw
I don't
myself
have a
in the hat,
problem
but either of these guys would be fine.
But I would sway myself to let Gary do it first.
Thanks, Mark.
So
All right, I'll nominate Gary.
let me
Okay.
do the formal part of it, because she'll
Make a
probably
move.
want to put it in the
Sure.
minutes and all of that. So, just in discussion, 3 of you, or who we're talking about?
I wouldn't, I mean, I'd
Well,
be
if there's
certainly
3,
served.
I'll take myself out and you got those 2.
Well,
I'm good with that, that's fine.
Well, what about,
I don't.
I don't, I don't.
I
love it.
mean, it's very vital to
But you're on the
all of us
KEDC
understanding,
anyway.
but I've got my boat loaded.
Yeah,
I don't have the bandwidth.
but you're on KEDC anyways
am.
because of the executive officer here.
Correct. So, all right.
And
so,
I would have had an interest, except that I'm rolling off, so, you know, that doesn't make any sense at all, so.
all right, with regard to item 1B, I will entertain a motion to do the 2 appointments we talked about.
well, I won't motion myself, but I'll make a motion that we put Gary Cooper as our primary Go Team member.
Let's go ahead. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor, raise your right hand. And that motion carries unanimously. Now the second motion would be for the
Do
alternate.
you want to be an alternate?
I move that Robert be.
Kent,
the man
would
be the-
you rather be an alternate?
I'll second it.
We have
There
a
you
motion
have it.
and a
I think he
second.
answered your question.
Any further discussion?
I got lost. You made the motion?
Kent
Yes.
made the motion.
Okay, Avery second.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Any further discussion? All those in favor, raise your right hand.
Can I do that?
Yeah, you
Yeah.
vote for yourself.
And that one passes unanimously. Any further conversation today with regard to this meeting? Very good. I will entertain an adjournment motion.
So moved.
In a second. All those in favor, raise your right hand. We are adjourned. It is 4:11.
Congratulations.